Welcome to Missing the Mark, where we look for meaning in strange places. I'm Christopher. Today I'm going to talk about the problem with ex-hominem arguments. And this is a term I've kind of coined myself so far as I'm aware, so I'll explain what I mean by it. But to give the context, it'll make the explanation easy. I think most people will have heard of an ad-hominem argument. An ad-hominem, meaning to the man, refers to when you're making an argument not to the argument somebody else made, but to him. As in, your argument is invalid because you're a bad man. Now, people aren't usually quite that explicit, and there are various problems that can come about with this. But it is, as a general rule, the case that most arguments, or many arguments at least, stand on their own. They talk about the state of the world and the logical connections between them, and whoever the man making it is, even to use the common phrase, even a fool and an error, if the argument is valid and if the argument is sound, if it's valid and its premises are true, the conclusion really does follow, regardless of who made this argument. Therefore, attacking the man really is irrelevant to the argument, to the conclusion at hand, to whether the conclusion follows from the premises. And more to the point, even more important, whether the conclusion is true. Okay. But here's the thing. There's a type of argument wherein the person making the argument uses himself in the argument. A really, really classic example. I smoked cigarettes as a child and I turned out just fine. The person has used himself as an example. Or, I stayed up late watching television all the time and I turned out okay. That sort of thing. The person, again, is using himself in the argument. This is why I call it an ex-hominem, from the man. The argument is coming not from the world, but from the man. The man himself is part of the premises of the argument. Look at that one. I watched plenty of late night television as a child and I turned out just fine. The implicit conclusion being, therefore, it's fine to watch plenty of late night television. Now, without reference to whether or not late night television is in fact fine to watch, it technically still exists, but I don't even know of who might possibly be watching it at this point, given the change in technology. But nonetheless, it's a hypothetical example, and so the particulars aren't very important. The thing is, his argument depends upon whether or not he in fact turned out all right. If he did not turn out all right, his argument is not sound because the premises to it are false. I watched this and I turned out okay. No, you didn't. You are seriously depressed. You frequently lie. You're selfish. You're mean-spirited. You did not in any sense turn out okay. Sounds like an ad hominem argument, and in a sense it is, but it is not. It is addressing the man because the man was actually in the argument. And this is one of the great problems with the ex-hominem argument. That if you stick yourself into the argument, the only way the other person can respond is by attacking you. That is to say, if you actually build the argument upon yourself, if you build an argument upon yourself, like, I am the best looking person in the world, and so I can tell you from experience that being the best looking person in the world has no problems at all. Well, the only way to show that this is false would be to show that I'm not the best looking person in the world. Which for me would be very easy to do, but the point is it would have to be done, and that would be attacking me. But there's no other option. And so these things are not always this explicit. I've used very explicit examples here, although they're not so far-fetched. I've seen plenty of whatever and I turned out okay arguments in real life. And they're often more subtle than that. They're often, the judgment of the person being used is often actually what the ex-hominem argument is. That's terrible. Well, you could just be wrong about that. You could have bad judgment and it's not terrible. It being terrible is not a premise in an argument that I'm agreeing to, and you are putting forward yourself as an authority here, implicitly, that it really is terrible. And so in order to hold that it is not terrible, I implicitly have to hold that you have bad judgment in that case. So you see this all over the place, actually, if you look for it, where people, especially in the modern world, that's a universal problem, I suspect, but in the modern world, people aren't taught logic or argumentation, so they're particularly bad at it, very commonly, where people insert themselves in one way or another, where either they appeal to themselves as an authority, or they appeal to themselves for some aspect of what they're talking about, or they appeal to themselves like, I do this, and I'm good, therefore this is good. I've seen that surprisingly often. And this is why I think there's actually something helpful in giving it a name, calling it an ex-hominem argument, in that it is, I think, a useful thing to point out in this sort of thing, to point out you're making an ex-hominem argument. That means that the only way I can address this argument is by attacking you. Are you sure you really want to put yourself out there like that? Are you sure you really want me to attack, to be in a position where I have to attack you to talk about this subject? Or do you want to withdraw yourself and talk about just the subject? Because, well, if you're putting yourself out there, then here we go. Just be aware of what you're doing. And I think there's a real value to that. I mean, there are a lot of contexts in a lot of places. The most appropriate response is simply to, in some sense or other, point out that a person is making an ex-hominem argument and dropping it. One of the better ones that I've seen, of course, and in response to like I turned out okay, is like, yep, you're definitely fine in every way, and then dropping it. Which, things along those lines, where you're not being directly insulting, but at the same time you are not letting the thing stand either, and you're simply dropping it, is often the most tactful way in a lot of circumstances. But there are circumstances that don't call for tact, they call for actually getting at the truth. And if a person makes an ex-hominem argument and sticks to it, being clear at that point that that's what they're doing, and so the only option open is to attack them, that they are making themselves part of the argument, and so to attack the argument, they're going to necessarily intrinsically be collateral damage, is often going to go over much better with everybody involved if you are pointing out that you have no other option, and since you're not going to back down about the subject, you'd rather discuss the subject than them, but they've dragged themselves into it. They can either drag themselves out of it, or, well, here we go, but at this point, you in fact are requiring me to proceed this way. Is a very important rhetorical point, so that it helps to convey that you're not simply being mean, you're not being nasty, but it really is on the other person that they have dragged themselves into this, and they have staked themselves as an authority in their argument, that they now are the argument. They're part of the argument. So you cannot attack the argument without attacking the man. And so, it's unfortunate. And so this is why I like the term ex-hominem argument, why I think it's valuable to identify ex-hominem arguments. Because they really are, people should not be making them, because they put everybody else in a very awkward and very difficult sort of circumstance. But at some point, if a person is really going to make it, this is the hill that I die on, I stand for this thing that's false, and I will not, I will not back down. The me as a human being depends upon this false thing. Well, unfortunately, the truth is more important than people. So, now that's not to say that proclaiming the truth in particular ways is always more important than people. That's not saying that getting people to admit the truth is always more important than people. But the truth is, and it is If a person demands that you cooperate with a lie, well, too bad for them. So, yeah, I mean, it's a fallen world, so there's small things you can always, you can overlook small things. You can, wisely choose not to hear. You can just shift subjects. You can be completely non-committal in ways that anybody looking on will understand as non-committal. There are ways of moving around small things, but when it comes to big things, when it comes to important things, if a person is really going to say, like, I have joined the forces of evil, and here I stand, and here I will die for the sake of this lie, join me. Use the Darth Vader one, join me and we will rule the universe. Well, that's really a pity. It's really unfortunate. But the truth is more important than people in the end. But it's really helpful on that note to really make this very clear that this is what's going on so that people don't misunderstand. People who are looking on, people, etc. People of goodwill, at least, will not misunderstand. So there's often ways around this when it's not so big, but sometimes the big things come up, and it's good to be clear at least. Until next time, may you hit everything you aim at,